which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So we have been given our packets, and the agenda for tonight is really just to talk about the possibility or option of moving to a ward system in Corcoran and what that would entail. This is really the beginning of the discussions on all of that. I don't anticipate a vote tonight to do this one way or the other, but I do anticipate this to be the first of many opportunities to gather information on this topic. So do we have a motion for approval of the agenda?
We certainly could do that.
Should we?
Also move. Second.
Okay, first by George, second by Gerald.
Thank you.
That's the Mylar pen.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And we do have Ken Gunther in the audience tonight. Ken's appointment hasn't come through yet. There's kind of a technicality thing. But I think we would be open to any input from the general public on this topic anyways. And so I would suggest that if Ken has some input that he'd like to share tonight, that he has the opportunity and freedom to do that as well. Okay?
And Chair, we do have Megan joining us virtually as well. Just a note for anyone joining us virtually, you could be, as Chair Lothar noted, you can participate as part of a member of the public in that capacity, as we're doing tonight.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, Megan. I don't know if we can hear her, but she can probably raise her hand.
Yep, she can
Okay,
raise
thank
her
you.
hand or unmute when needed.
So, is there anybody here, Ken, for an open forum on anything else besides the Charter Commission? Just, we need to cover that. No? Okay. So then, do I have a motion to then approve the minutes for this evening?
I would note, I think that the minutes did not end up getting included in the packet, so we can approve those at the actual.
At the end? Okay.
We can approve those at the next
Meeting.
We,
Okay.
since this is a special meeting, I think that that inadvertently ended up on the agenda.
Okay, all right, thank you. So let's move forward to the ward discussion. And in our audience tonight, or in our midst, we do have a representative of the League of Minnesota Cities. And Jessica, if you'd like to do the honors of introducing herself.
Well, tonight we have Tori Kelly with the
Key
with the League. And the League of Minnesota Cities represents cities throughout throughout Minnesota. And she's been kind enough to be a resource for us. The League provides resources to cities on a variety of topics, from human resources to legal, to help us manage all of the different things that we're required to manage. And so I reached out to the League to just get some feedback on kind of what might be happening. And Tori was able to come and join us tonight and talk about wards, and so I do have a presentation that I can put up on the.
We welcome you tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Okay.
Just let me know I can.
Sounds good. All right, so as Jessica said, I am Tori Key. I work in the research department at the League, so we are under the general counsel. We don't provide actual service, legal services in my department. We're here to be informational resources to commission members, council members, administrators, pretty much the whole gambit. And we provide information on every topic possible, but I am assigned to the city charter service, so it is one of my specialty areas to perform presentations like this and to work with the Charter Commission in developing the charter changes, amendments, and things like this, like changing to a ward system and sharing that info with you. So I can pass around a couple cards in case you guys need to get in contact with me. There's one for you too. Afterwards, this is my direct information. I'm happy to answer any questions or have calls, and if I need to come back or log in virtually to answer questions or provide resources, I can do that as well. So tonight I'm going to specifically talk about wards, and then I do have some information at the end about charter amendments and the process. So if you want me to walk you through that, it's a very basic, just couple slides on that, just so you're aware of kind of how that process works, if you need that. I didn't want to make assumptions. You can go to the next one. So the wards system. So what is a ward? They are, when a city is portioned out into portions that are represented by specific elected officials on the council, and they're elected by the individuals who live in those wards. There are 70 cities that have ward systems, approximately, and 8 of the 10 biggest cities in the state have wards. I will say there's a lot of them are in the metro area. We know Minneapolis, St. Paul, but then there's even smaller ones, Crookston, Ada, different cities up north are charter cities and have ward systems. So they're kind of spread out from low population cities to the highest population cities. Cities with wards must redistrict their wards after the federal census, so that just occurred, but you would have to keep up with that to make sure that your wards are in equal proportions as the population grows and changes here. And they need to be as equal as possible. I'll show you some examples later that where different cities have set parameters, but it's usually that the apportionment should be about 5 to 10%, or, no more than 5 or 10% different among the wards. And I think 10 is pretty much the rule. So there should be no more than a difference of 10% population between wards. And incorporating wards can have some impacts on voting precincts. So that can be something that is a little cumbersome to deal with. Make sure that if any precincts are being moved due to ward systems or the wards are somehow affecting precincts, those will have to be reestablished. Next. So there are requirements that are outlined by the state statutes and the Secretary of State about wards and the requirements that must be met. So the one is the population, that they has to be proportionate in population among the wards. And there's some additional requirements, such as they need to be bounded by precinct lines. They are compact in area, and they are composed of contiguous territory. So you don't want a ward that's going across a river or something like that, some natural barrier. Usually those, that's gonna kind of confine where your ward is going to be. Many cities that have rivers or other water sources like that, or whatever it might be, they already have their precincts, their voting precincts set up like that. So usually it's pretty simple to make sure that that's incorporated, but you just want to be sure that your ward isn't spanning across some area that's not connected. All right, we can go to the next. As I said, wards must be as equal in population as practicable. This is the state statute. If you're interested in reading that, I don't know that you might be, but just in case you need to see it yourself. And it's not always possible to draw the wards equally. There might be some situations where it's not exactly equal, like the total of population is not divisible by the number of wards. So we have, 7 wards and we have 100,000 people. How do we divide that up? But that's okay as long as you can get it as close as possible. And another situation is if the population totals within the census blocks don't provide a refined enough number to draw that equal representation in wards. So if you want to do 5 wards, and right now the population in that specific ward, maybe you're seeing that it's going to be growing soon, or it's currently being developed, but there's not that population there presently. But you foresee that it might be growing to be equal, that might cause that unequal population. Again, the rule is going to be that 5 to 10% kind of leeway among the size of the population in each ward. Next one. So the state also suggests that the cities describe their wards as best as they possibly can and divide them up using certain roads, rivers, etc. Something that will divide and make sense to the city, and that is sufficient enough to define it, such as east of Main Street or south of this creek. But if the ward boundaries follow multiple features, meets and bounds might be the better way to describe it. So that's up to the city to determine if there's naturally occurring populations in different areas that make sense right now that you can easily describe based on city streets or other boundaries such as rivers, lakes, etc. Use those. Otherwise, you might need to use the meets and bounds process, which don't ask me about meets and bounds. I don't know that enough about that today, but it would describe the boundaries of the wards in such a way that you could walk that described boundary. So as far as actually establishing wards, so once you guys have all spoken, got public input on it, and decided we want to proceed with it, it is good practice to publish it to the city population. It's not required that you do public notice or a public meeting on it, but it is good practice just to get the input of the residents. So that's one best practice that I would suggest doing. And the second requirement for notice is required. You need to notice to the county auditor and the Secretary of State that you are establishing wards. If your precinct designation does not reference a ward name, so if it's not precinct 1, ward 1, or something else that really makes sense, the clerk is just going to want to provide the county auditor with as much information as possible describing where those wards are and where the precincts are within those wards. There is a voter's right to contest it. If the voters decide they don't agree with the ward system, they can. They would file that with the district court.
Would that be disagreeing with just implementing the system, or would it be where the ward is being?
I think it could be either.
Okay.
Yeah, it could be either.
All right.
So thankfully, if you have that public hearing, that can kind of flesh out some concerns about implementing it. And it would probably be on the later end of
Sure.
how they're drawn.
Sure.
So anybody can file that.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions about the kind of establishment? All right, so go to the next one.
I'm gonna wait, I'm writing them down.
Okay.
Well, I'll ask the question, just because I'm out of more curiosity than probably, I'm getting into the weeds more than we should. But what would be grounds for contesting a ward? Do you know off the top of your head? If you don't,
Not
that's
off the top of
fine.
my head. There is the Secretary of State puts out a redistricting guide that talks about,
So if you didn't follow
requirements.
those things, then that would
Right.
be your grounds.
right,
Okay.
and usually it's just, they don't agree with it, and then they have a certain parameter of time to file. But it's, they could probably say they're not equal in size, they haven't described it well enough,
Okay. Those types of things.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't like wards. That
Right,
isn't a ground.
Right,
for
and I
that.
can, I'll be talking about why cities consider wards, and so
Yeah.
there's many reasons to implement them, and it's based on the city's needs and wants, so that would probably not be a warranted, point to veto it. Yeah,
So one follow-up question, maybe,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Tori, because this is what I wrote down, and it's really the same question, whether there's ever been a published opinion related to disproportionate population in the wards. Because, 5 to 10% variance.
right,
It's kind of in the eye of the beholder until a district court, until there's a published legal opinion, it's a little hard to say a court would or wouldn't accept.
right.
We can get it this close, but we can't get it much better. Well, where does that stand if it is challenged?
Especially if you're trying to follow some kind of topographical guidelines as well.
Well, and then when you have, 5 school districts that cover Corcoran?
We do, yes.
So, I mean, if you're trying to minimize the number of ballot styles you have, which would be in staff's best interest for that, from an election administration standpoint, you know, it's good to have that rule of thumb, 5 to 10% flexibility, because if you tried to do it equally, you could end up with a whole bunch of ballot styles and make
Right.
election administration for Jessica and her staff a nightmare.
Right.
Jerry,
So-
did you have a question?
I would say
No,
the answer is yes,
I had a
probably
comment.
there has been. I don't know that off the top of my head, but I'm happy to send it over anything that I have as far as if it's been litigated.
Jerry?
Thank you for talking with me last fall, because the
Oh.
information you sent me was very helpful.
Good.
Tori and I talked a couple of times and swapped a couple emails last fall, because I asked for lists of cities. And, Dan, to answer your question, in my research, I'm not aware, and I've got stacks and more paper at home, I'm not aware of any legal precedent in this state about somebody contesting the boundaries of a ward, okay? I found others, one in New Jersey, one in Michigan, where cities contested the boundaries of a ward. And a lot of it was around, I don't want to be in this ward if it's going to be developed. I'm interested in this kind of land, okay?
Right.
And they would contest it, or vice versa. I do want to be in the developed area, but, you know, anytime there's development, NIMBY raises its ugly head, and then there's all kinds of questions. I found several cities that used that whole NIMBY thing, I don't want to be involved in development, as a way of constructing their wards, so that some people who didn't want to be were left out, and those who didn't mind the development were included in, and it got ugly. And then I grew up in Chicago, and changing the boundaries on a ward is an
annual thing.
Yeah, it really is an annual thing. And that is one of the cons of wards, is it excludes then certain populations, or, pockets them in such a way. Anyway,
Again.
so, thank you for all the info, too.
Yeah, kind of following up on Dan's comment there about the school districts, are you aware of any communities in the state of Minnesota that have 5 school districts in the same city? Besides Corcoran?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Sure.
Yeah. But, I haven't prepared that information, so there might be.
No,
I don't know that we keep.
I'm just
track
kind
of
of throwing
school
that out
districts, so
because
yeah.
I think that's a very
It
valid
is,
concern.
Plymouth has Wayzata, they have Robbinsdale, they have Brooklyn Park,
Osseo.
and Osseo. So there's 4 right there, so,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Well, in these cities that are the size of a township, you might end up with, you're gonna
Yeah,
have
sure.
multiple schools.
absolutely.
And another question related to that is, I know we transitioned from 2 precincts to 3, what, about 4 years ago or 6?
Yes, in 2020, or 2018 we
Okay,
did.
so it's the case now, and having been an election judge, I know that we got lots of stacks of ballots to begin with, because you have to sync up not only precinct but school district. So you get all those permutations. The question, Corey, is, let's say if we had a ward system similar to some of the neighboring communities, and say there were 4 wards, something like that, maybe it's Plymouth, that way, then you necessarily have 4 precincts for voting purposes.
They have more than 20 precincts for
So
voting.
that's what, the precincts are defined by sort of voting management numbers, how many people you can have into one location for voting. So you can have multiple precincts within a ward.
Right.
Yes. And just a note, part of the reason we went to the 3 precincts was just space in general, but also was related to that narrowing down. I was able to get rid of one of our ballot styles, but that, we used to have 5 ballots at one precinct and 3 at another, and so we were able to go down to 3, 3, and 2, or 3,
Yeah, so.
something like that.
It really is complicated if you had a ward that was in multiple precincts.
Yeah.
Which, in a community like this, is a real possibility.
Or multiple school districts.
And I have multiple school districts.
Yeah, so lots of considerations to make when you're looking at your map and trying to draw lines, is implementing the school districts and the precincts and other things like that to make it make sense. Yeah,
Probably population and school districts would be the two front runners on
right.
how to design a ward,
Right.
maybe, you know.
Yeah. And I'll talk about some of the different ways that you can establish wards and at-large. I'll just move into that. I think that's a natural kind of next conversation. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, well, actually, as a follow-up item,
Yeah.
Jessica, we have the census information by school district.
Oh,
It might be interesting to see where the current population falls on purely school district lines, because if you think about it geographically, Wayzata is fairly small geographically, but it's big population-wise.
Right.
Same thing's happening in the northeast corner with Osseo or
Yep.
Maple Grove. And then, the odd man out might be Delano.
That would be the small one.
Yeah, Rockford is gonna have a fair population, and Buffalo's gonna have a fair population right
Right.
now.
Yeah, you could probably throw Rockford and Delano together.
Yeah.
Although
That would be
Rockford,
interesting.
Rockford is getting bigger because of the M&I development.
Right, around the fringes it's
Yeah,
changing, but
yeah.
it just might be an interesting starting point to see if they're
Right.
even remotely close in population. To begin with.
I'm gonna look that up.
all right. So there's kind of three different ways as far as options for composition of your council. So the first one, and this is wards or no wards, pretty much. So first, one member elected from each ward that makes up an even number of council members. Your mayor is kind of separate, right? It's kind of a separate thing. So you have 5 wards, you have 4 wards, you have 4 council members, 1 from each ward, and then you have your mayor. There's a second option, which is a combination. So you could have, what is your council number?
We
5.
have 5.
Okay, so,
Yep.
okay, so you could have a combination of representatives that are at-large representatives and then members of the wards. So if you wanted to have 2 wards, 2 at-large members, and your mayor, that, you could do that. And so that kind of gives you representation from those special districts and then representation citywide. The final one is what you have right now, at-large elections of an even number of council members. This is usually suitable in smaller, homogeneous communities where everybody's interests are roughly the same. And I know especially growth, I mean, goodness, having all these school districts and all this too, that makes you guys not as homogeneous as you might be. So that could warrant the movement to a ward system or a combination system. So those are the top 2 right there are the ward systems. Next. So there are good things and bad things about each of the compositions. There we go. The National Civic League has a model charter, city charter, and it's like 80-some pages, but it has it has various conversations about why they put things a certain way, different considerations for city sizes, obviously state regulations and all that. But they have suggested that ward, they call it district, election representation, or the combination ward with at-large seats are probably 2 of the best options for charter cities. Because it addresses diversity and representation issues. So it helps people make sure that they feel like their voices are being heard. They're not saying that you can't continue to do the even number of at-large council members, but that one of these two systems help address some of those common concerns that occur in cities. They said that it should be considered only as an alternative for small communities again, but out of the ones in Minnesota, we have 70 with wards right now, and I have an old list of how they are made up, but they are kind of divided between if they're at-large and then ward-specific, or if it's ward-specific among the whole council. So it's kind of divided in Minnesota. There's no one or the other that outweighs one. You can go to the next. So, as far as having the single member ward system, so that's gonna be when you have 4 wards with 4 elected council members in each ward. The citizens might feel isolated and unconnected to the council without some of that geographical representation. So they feel like their voices are being heard when they have their directly appointed person, elected person. If there's a significant difference or conflicts occurring among ethnic, racial, or economic groups, or, development, or for whatever reason, your city is seeing some pockets of differences among the city that might need more representation, that single member ward system will give those populations that direct representation. It feels like it's more equitable, it promotes good governance, and you could avoid some legal challenges under the Voting Rights Act. If there is a specific concentration of groups in an area, that representation really helps, makes them feel heard, and the ward district system costs less for those running for office than citywide campaigns. So if somebody feels like they can't afford to campaign citywide because of economic challenges or anything else, being able to just campaign for your ward, less signs, less doors to knock on, and it just encourages people to get out there and run.
Raises the question as to whether or not any cities in Minnesota that you're aware of do anything to inform the public about the candidates that are running. One of the dilemmas that we have here is that we have a newspaper that doesn't get very widely distributed. That's one vehicle for people to learn about candidates. The only other is a League of Women Voters activity, which is very poorly attended usually. The city at one time used to have candidate forum that was attended a little bit better than more recent events. But it is a challenge when you start to get a lot of folks, and particularly as you look at the stretching of the period of time when people are going to be voting, so that in order to be competitive, somebody has to get their information out very early before voting starts. Then, because it is such a long time, they have to send it several other times because people will forget before they vote. So one of my biggest concerns about the length of voting time is, 1 week would be nice, but 3 weeks, it really gets ugly. So I did some research, but I haven't really found a lot of information. School districts typically put out information by a mailer that talks about the candidates for school board, but then the school board members themselves still have to do their own campaigning if they want to do that. But there has to be some way that the city, using maybe a candidate website, could give opportunities for people who maybe don't want to spend $5,000 or $10,000 sending out materials to get their information out to the public, and then perhaps do a newsletter or something like that. So have communities, are you aware of communities that have done that to try to improve their voter information?
Not off the top of my head. I wrote it down, and I'll definitely look at it. But I think that I live in Plymouth, and I think that I saw when I was looking up who can I vote for? There was an article that outlined the different candidates from the different areas, and then if they had a website or a Facebook or something else that they were using for their official campaigning, they linked it. And then if the candidate didn't have it available, it obviously wasn't linked, so that could maybe cause concern, but I think everyone has the open ability, right, to create a website or a blog or a Facebook for their campaign. So having some sort of designated forum like that to share all of the candidates' information could be a possibility, but I don't know. I'm happy to look into it too.
I did find one example in Oregon that did a beautiful job of listing their candidates, and it was a fairly good-sized city. They probably had 50 or 60 candidates, but they broke it down by ward.
Sure.
And typically they would have 5 or 6 candidates per ward.
Right.
And they had a bio, some information that the candidate provided about each particular candidate with a picture and everything. It was very well done. As we start to get into this whole issue of the cost of campaigning, if we could discover a little bit more about how much communities can do to formally, inform the public about their candidates. Right now, it's pretty much up to the candidate if they want to get their information out or
And
not.
how they get it out, too.
And it's expensive. It's running for office in a town like Corcoran now is about what it was 20 years ago to run for state office.
One other point on that, and this is really sort of more of a qualitative discussion, I guess, or getting into the policy of it. But I would really argue that any system that promotes the opportunity to do face-to-face campaigning is a good thing worth pursuing. And I think particularly in a big community like ours, we're getting farther away from people's ability to door knock. And that was a real dilemma whenever I did a campaign, because particularly if you're fully engaged with your job and you've got a family and you've got all of the demands of home ownership, and the people who've done it know to be able to spend all day on the weekend knocking on doors in a community like this is really a daunting task. So that isn't probably one of the first things I thought of when I started thinking about the ward system, but the opportunity to maybe concentrate geographically the area you focus on, I think is a real benefit, and it probably will help promote people actually wanting to get out and go door to door and face to face. And particularly now in an era when so much of the campaign takes more of a digital approach or social media approach, and we're still probably a community where there's a little bit of a generational divide in how people will approach campaigning. So there's that distinction. But just kind of a couple of thoughts on why I think the benefit of being able to campaign door to door is really a positive aspect to reducing the geographic scope of an area where you're doing that campaign.
It would still leave the mayor hanging out there with having to run every 2 years and hit everybody. So it doesn't solve the
Another
problem.
discussion, and
Yeah.
George opened the door, but I would argue as somebody who did 8 or 9 mayoral campaigns, I would have loved to have suggested that we go to a 4-year term, but for the sitting mayor to suggest that is a tricky thing.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, as I guess there are 2 current living former mayors in this city, I believe, Tom and me.
Yep.
I would argue for that full bore as we go forward, and if that's part of the outcome of this overall discussion.
Isn't that what Plymouth, in the information you sent us, isn't that what Plymouth did?
They did that.
They switched the mayoral
They did.
to 4 years. That does make a lot of sense.
We could do
What
that.
paper were you referring to?
Crow
that-
River? Crow River
The
News?
Crow River News is the official paper.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what we do in Spring Lake Park is, we're part of a larger cable commission, so, and I think, I don't know if Corcoran's part of CCX or not, but part of that is that they hire essentially an anchor to interview all of the potential candidates, and then they record those, and then they play them on our cable access channel, they stream them on YouTube or, and everything else, so people can watch as much or as little about specific candidates and their visions. They ask them all the same questions, and so you get a good feel of what the candidate's vision is.
So there are obviously going to be some drawbacks of implementing this single member system. So with that smaller scope, you know, we're focusing on our individual wards, that might make the council members only want to talk about their issues from their wards, and it will leave citywide issues kind of out in the air. You know, everyone's focusing on, well, my ward wants this, and my ward wants that. What does the city need as a whole? So it can lead to that. That's going to be a positive side for having the at-large and the single ward members to kind of focus on both the city issues and the ward issues. But that can come up. Log rolling or vote swapping. I had never heard of this. I had to Google what it was, but that quid pro quo. Like, I'll vote for yours if you vote for mine. You're not actually accomplishing anything. You're really just trading favors at that point. And then obviously creating the fair and equal districts can be very tricky. We already had a pretty big discussion about that. You want to avoid gerrymandering and those unequal districts, and it could leave open some concerns about the one person, one vote. If people from one ward feel that their ward has less representation than a different ward due to size or some other, you know, geographical or otherwise way that the ward was set up, they could claim we have less power than the other ward. So you want to just keep all of those things in consideration when establishing a single member ward system. That is a tongue twister. We can go to the next one. So as far as a mixed council system, so that's going to be where you have some members who are at-large members and others that represent the wards. There could be some it would eliminate, sorry, I'm like, why are complaints positive? It eliminates complaints about the Voting Rights Act because everybody's voice is being heard by somebody. Everybody's has a representative that's at the council representing their interests. It will provide that citywide perspective and the ward's perspective, so we're not just focusing on the little issues from each group, but we have that holistic citywide view as well as that individual ward representation. The ward representatives, the council members, are accountable to their specific constituents, whereas the at-large representatives kind of balance out with that citywide perspective. And it allows residents in underrepresented areas to have representation of all their concerns. So that's probably where those wards would be set up, maybe in areas that feel they're not being heard or traditionally underrepresented by the current system. Implementing wards there might make those residents feel they're being heard better.
Corcoran is somewhat unique in that we really don't have a lot of areas that probably would come under the Voting Rights Act issues. You could probably argue maybe that the trailer park would fall in that category, but it's pretty small group. What we do have, probably more than anything else, is developed areas versus non-developed areas, large land holdings versus small land holdings, and those are the two primary differences. You know, so the large land holdings, you know, there's obviously differences in ordinances that might affect those areas versus the more intensely developed areas. And that's where the conflicts could arise. But the bottom line is you got to have a way to find good candidates, because a good candidate should represent everybody, whether they are the people that they live right next door to or the people that live across town. Because when they only have 5 representatives, they've got to consider what's best for the community as a whole.
I agree. And that's definitely a reason, can be a reason though to implement the ward system, because maybe there aren't candidates that, you know, they're favoring just this specific population, or the population thinks that. They have some sort of perception about, you know, Joe Smith who lives on the other side of town. I don't know him. My kids are in a different school district. I don't know his values. I feel like he's maybe not representing me because we live on the opposite sides of the city. So I think that's a good way though, you know, that having a ward system can kind of balance out the public's perception. I don't disagree that all council members should be representing the city as a whole, but that might not be the public perception for various reasons.
40 years ago, we had commissioners. In other words, people who would be in charge of administration or in charge of the police department or in charge of public works. And we may have gotten well beyond that in terms of the quality of people that have been running for office more recently, but there is a tendency sometimes for people to become parochial in their vision and only really focus on their own department. And so all of a sudden you get departmental conflicts. And I could see the same thing happening in a ward situation if you get the wrong people in there. So the bottom line is it's the quality of the people.
Yes.
That's in every system. But,
Yes.
but the one thing about the mixed is that if you have 3 wards, an at-large, and then the mayor, you have, as a resident, access to a majority of the council. Does that make sense? So you have access to 3 votes that represent you versus jumping and talking to someone. I mean, you might anyway, but feeling you have to jump into someone else's ward and talk to that person versus, so I think that's one of the benefits of the mixed also.
And another point is that the representatives from the wards, I think we tend to naturally gravitate towards thinking this person is gonna sort of vote in favor of the best interests of this interest group or whatever. But I think it starts earlier than that, in that person is more likely to bring the day-to-day experience or perspective that group has to the initial discussion of an issue. So a good example here is that we've got a whole group population in our community now that would come to City Hall thinking in terms of what are our water and sewer rates like? What are we paying for water and sewer? And there's a huge part of the population, if you raise that question, they'd say, what's that? You mean you pay a water bill? They wouldn't even have a clue. Versus there are other people who would say, well, what's the issue with outbuildings? I mean, we don't have them. Why is anybody concerned about outbuildings? Because we don't have them in the southeast corner of the city. But I'll tell you, there's a huge part of the city where outbuildings is
It's a big deal.
hot button issue.
Yeah.
So it's not to say that somebody's gonna vote for allowing big outbuildings citywide, or somebody's gonna say we need to spread water and sewer buildings citywide. It's more, hey, these are concerns or perspectives or issues that I know my neighbors share when we have this discussion. Maybe you guys weren't aware of that. Let's talk about this and sort of spread the knowledge. So it's not always just a matter of lining up the votes, I think.
Don't take away my outbuilding before I can build mine. So.
You have too many screens.
I have too many screens.
Obviously, there's some drawbacks as well. Some that we talked about, others like council relations. If there's an at-large members and there's the ward-specific members, and then you have your mayor, the at-large members might get a big head and think that they are better than the ward representatives, and the mayor might feel that the at-large members are kind of creeping up and trying to take their power or their status. So just ensuring that all the ward member, or all of the council members from the wards and from the at-large share the same offices, services, lengths of terms. They just have that equal status. So however, you need to make sure that that's told and implemented, because it's obviously true, but making sure that the status quo within the council reflects that.
I think you can also get big heads regardless of the system.
Well, that's
Don't you think? So I think that's more of a character issue with the people that we elect to office to, so.
And then just the city trying to determine the appropriate ratio of at-large versus ward members. It might be easier with only 4 members that you have to figure out. It's a little different if you go up to 6. So just making sure if it's 2 and 2, or maybe you want 3 and 1, just making sure that you can have that appropriate ratio that makes sense for the city can be difficult to determine. And the courts do favor the majority of the council to be elected by and from wards, generally. So that's just like a pro tip, but it's not obviously necessary. All right, so this is just, oh my gosh, I forgot to take the thing out, so just click like 8 times. So here's like all of the pros and cons. I think that's it. There we go. We've talked about a lot of these. You guys actually raised a ton of these pros and cons, if not formally addressed in one of the other slides. One of the positives is that the ballots are shorter and simpler for the wards, maybe not for the administration side, but it can make it easier where you don't have 50 council members to choose from, you only have your 5. You can build those personal connections. Personal connections come to the council too. Here's what we're talking about in our area, in our neck of the woods. And those specific interests are represented or heard by the council as a whole. Campaign costs lower, maybe, changing world out here, we don't know how to best do it, but it can be lower cost for that single individual. It can attract more candidates if somebody now only has to campaign in their ward versus campaigning citywide. They might be more interested in running. Maybe they feel like they have a better chance of winning if they're running only against one other person versus up against 15. They might be more responsive to constituent needs because they're somebody's neighbor. They live in that same geographical area as them. And they're typically held more accountable by the public because they are their neighbor, directly across the street or whatever it might be. The cons, if everybody has the same interests or needs, it might not justify separating them out. There might be, I think somebody already raised it, you might not actually see eye to eye with your representative from your ward, so you feel like your voice is being heard, but maybe the ward next door, you align more with that council member's views. So that can be a definite con. Finding quality candidates, I think it's always an issue, but especially from wards. You might have more quality candidates in Ward 1 and you have 10 people running versus only 2 that run in a different ward. Maybe they're just running because they see it's open and might as well throw my name in. They're maybe not actually a great candidate.
So, quick question, this might be getting ahead of the game when, for when you actually set up the wards. If you actually have an election where you have no candidates run in a ward, would you have a situation where the council would appoint, or can you structure it in the charter that the next highest vote getter in an at-large setting would get the seat?
Typically it's write-ins from the ward. The person has to live in that district.
Right.
That just happened in Crookston this year. They had a ward that had no candidates, and so they took the write-in, and he was elected with 8 votes. He had the highest number of write-ins. So it went to the write-in.
Cheap.
But if the person elected declines the certificate, then the council would appoint because you would have a vacancy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I only know that Crookston example because I know the guy who was elected or was the write-in. He felt he had a Facebook campaign. He said, "Write me in today." So, yeah. Competition for scarce resources, again, instead of coming together as a whole city, we're fighting for the scraps among the wards and trying to get the most for our area. There might be those special interest groups that are overrepresented in a specific ward, or like your example of outbuildings, that might be a special interest group and they might be less represented, and so we don't care to talk about outbuildings. We're gonna go talk about other things that are more important to the majority of us. Sorry, I'm picking on you guys. They can be very difficult to change once they're established. It can be costly. Think about redistricting, think about what you went through with the precincts. So if your population suddenly is changing, or we need to change the wards in some way, it can be costly. It takes time and a lot of effort to do. So if you're gonna establish it, it should be established at the right time. Election costs on the city might be more due to the increased number of polling places required and the election judges needed. And then if you're changing people's polling places, they might get confused, which is also a good reason to hold your public comment period so that people are aware this change is probably coming. Here are some things that will be in correspondence with soon. Your precinct might change. So that is something that you should be aware of. Going next, I don't have to go through all of these, and I'll send this to you so you can share it with them. I put together some various provisions from other cities, not all geographically close This first one here from Redwood Falls, they have a population of 5,000. So I was trying to give you an idea of cities that are closer into population to you guys. Here is how they have their charter city, their language in their charter set up. Pretty standard that they're divided into 3 wards. They have one constituent from each ward, which is a requirement. You must live in the ward in which you are running, and you have to remain in that ward. They talk about reappointment, elections, and then the form of government. And they talk about how they have 3 ward members and 2 council members elected at large. So their mayor must not be
So
voting.
yeah, mayor's not voting.
Yeah, their mayor's not voting in this situation. So that's Redwood Falls, just as an example, yeah.
So, the reason we started discussing wards is obviously because of the development that started to take place, and we could foresee some really high pockets of population, and then some larger areas where there wasn't. And so that's kind of what is the underpinnings behind what triggered our conversation. But do you know anything specific about why Redwood Falls went from an open to a ward system? Was there some kind of problem or situation they were trying to remedy? Because I would be interested in getting some answers to that question. Where cities basically roughly the same size of Corcoran thought they needed to pull the trigger and go into wards.
Tori was kind enough to send me a list.
Yeah, and I have lists,
And I picked out 6 or 7 that were somewhere between 6,000 and 11,000.
Right.
And with your or the group's permission, I'd like to do some research on each of those
Sure.
and find out when they went to wards and why.
Why? The why is a bigger issue. for
And
me.
what were the issues that they had implementing the system? And now that they've been at it, are they okay with it, or
Sure.
what do they think?
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly the reasoning, but Ramsey is an example of one. I looked to see when they changed to the ward system and what their population was at. And they had a boom. They were between 1990 and 2000, they were at 6,000 population. And then, from 1990, they were at 6,000. To 2000s, they were at 18,000.
Okay.
So, and then in 2001 is when they implemented their ward system. And so they've now increased in population up to 28,000. So I'm not saying that they changed because they saw the growth, but there must have been something in 2001, if you look at that. I'm no statistician, but if you look at how their population was steadily growing, and at the time when they implemented their ward system, and now how much they've grown, there must have been some sort of, boom in businesses or some other reason where people were moving up to Ramsey. Presumably, people are kind of expanding out of the Twin Cities, right? And I think you guys are close enough here that I can see how people might be moving outward. You definitely see that. So Ramsey foresaw that their population was expanding and they needed to change their system. I bet. I don't know for a fact.
Sure.
But just an example of one that kind of changed right at the right time.
Ken, did you have a comment?
Oh, I was gonna say, I had come across Ramsey's
Right.
a few years ago when we started, talking about this. That was one of the early examples. And, Corcoran's probably on a pretty similar glide path, because when we adopted our first 2030 plan, we envisioned going from about 6,000 to 17,000 in about a 15-year span. And then the 2008 recession was a humongous speed bump that changed all of that. So now we're probably back onto that slope, that curve. So I would imagine that the Ramsey model is pretty similar. The other comment I wanted to make is that I remember it's an old lesson that big cases make bad law. Crises events make bad policy. When we respond to problems, we tend to do it with less foresight and patience than we ought. And that's one thing we have in our favor here, is that I think we're kind of approaching this, I don't want to say from an academic or hypothetical standpoint, we know what the trends and the growth will be in our community, assuming things continue as they have. So to be able to plan not in the face of crisis or a huge community blow-up is probably beneficial.
Right.
And having experienced a couple of community blow-ups, we know that it's just really hard to govern through that stuff in a small
It's a challenge.
community.
I know that, Jerry, you need to leave here soon.
Yeah.
I don't want to cut you short, Tori, but I would certainly be in favor of you bringing back to the commission
Sure.
some findings.
Sure.
If we could get a consensus on that, So,
Be glad to.
so I appreciate you doing that. yeah.
No problem.
Yeah, the rest that I have are just sample provisions from different cities, and that might be something, they're not really easy to speak aloud, so it might be something that is just better suited for you to read upon, and they're just examples of how other cities have set up their
Yeah,
wards.
I would be particularly interested in, not necessarily a problem, but what might have instigated or the trigger, that the threshold or whatever that was, thought we need to go from this to that in making this decision, which is really what is behind, I think, a lot of our discussion on it. too,
Mhm.
so.
Chair and members, if anyone does want to continue to speak, it sounds like they're having some issues hearing us, so if you want to speak towards the mics,
Thank you.
just a note on that.
Well,
Anything else, Tori?
not necessarily. Like I said, there's plenty of examples here in the PowerPoint that you can look through, and I've linked the charters. So if you actually want to go view their whole city charter, you can, and that would have the dates that they made those changes to, so you could kind of say, oh, here I see that they revised their charter to implement wards or to do other things at this time. So feel free to look through that. And then at the end, I just had some stuff about actually making charter amendments. We don't have to go through that today. We can go through that another time. I just included some basics of how it's done, and it can be kind of complicated, and Jessica and I can work through that. And I'm pretty skilled now at working through those challenges, but usually it's good to have the Charter Commission on board with the City Council. It makes things a lot easier, and Jessica said you have good relationships, so I'm not super concerned about that, but making sure that the council is aware of the changes that the Charter Commission is making can be very important. So just some things to consider as you proceed forward. But if anything comes up, you have my information. You can call me, that is my direct line. I'm there from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, but leave me a voicemail or send an email. And if you want me to come back, I'm happy to come back, and I'll send you, or Jessica will send you, all of the resources that I put together for you guys. Yeah.
One quick
Yeah.
question, and you may have gotten this question before, and maybe in light of, say, some of the fairly recent experiences in the city of Minneapolis, does the league have statistics on the number of petitions for amendment that are actually technically sufficient to move forward versus the number of petitions that are denied on the basis of legal inadequacy of the petition itself?
No.
Is that kind of a
No.
nitpicker's kind of geek kind of question? Because frequently, well, I think that's been our experience, that
Right.
petitions fail on technical grounds more often than policy grounds. And the problem is that when petitions fail on technical grounds, it creates bad blood, or
Yeah.
the result is bad blood, ill feelings. People feel like they're being denied an opportunity to raise an issue that a lot of people care about, and they think that they're getting shafted on
Right.
technicality. They don't appreciate the fact that the rules for petitions are there to protect the people and create an informed vote.
Right.
And I know that that's happened in communities large and small. That's the one petition that this community has had for an amendment failed on legal grounds, and it created a huge blow up, and it became the campaign issue in the subsequent election, which was why did City Hall ignore this petition?
Right.
Well, it was legally inadequate, and the people who signed it didn't know what they were signing when they signed it. But that message never came through in the campaign.
Yeah, we don't collect that data.
Yeah.
I've definitely had some clerks or administrators reach out and ask, like, I don't think this is written in the right form, and that's like, yeah, those are the technical issues, or they signed it, but they didn't put their addresses. So we've had those calls before, but we don't keep track of it necessarily. I can probably run a search through our system to see how many times it's been self-reported, but we don't
I
really
don't know
keep
if
that
that's-
data.
I wouldn't bother spending
Yeah.
time on it, but it strikes me because I did pay attention in Minneapolis when they were going through the defund, all of that stuff.
Mhm.
And I actually know the chair of the Minneapolis Charter Commission, so
Mhm.
it had kind of an interesting note.
Mhm.
And my reaction was the same there on a much larger scale than occurred in our city when you had people who, in good faith, were trying to promote a public position
Mhm.
and, you know, getting signatures on it. You could agree or disagree with what they were trying to accomplish, but it was a good faith effort. And they really feel burned when they learn that, no, this won't go to a vote because you didn't have the name of the sponsoring committee on each page for signature,
Mhm.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and if you hear wind
Ignorance
of
of the law
people
is no
wanting to
excuse.
submit a petition, pointing, maybe not you specifically, but, or anyone on the city council saying, here's the statute that says, here's the form of how to fill it out, just so you know, this will make it,
So Tori, after we had that experience, we actually amended our charter
Sure.
so that one of the sections of the charter contains the language on how to amend the charter. So people can read it for themselves, right in the document, this is how you do an amendment. And we did that through a friendly amendment via the council unanimous vote.
Yeah.
Because it was sort of non-controversial, it was just putting more of the code into the charter itself. So people couldn't say, we didn't know how to amend it.
Right.
You know.
We've had discussion this evening about people not knowing what they were signing or how to fill out a document or who the candidates were and who was qualified. And my wife and I have this discussion every 2 years. And I plunk her down in front of the computer and I say, look up the person's website and read it, and then write down the questions that you have, and then send them an email or pick up the phone and call them. I've worked on campaigns since I was 16 years old. I've never run in my own, but I've worked on campaigns since I was 16. And for somebody to not know who a candidate is and what a candidate stands for is their own problem. That's their own fault. And for somebody to sign a petition, somebody walks up to me and I'm walking down, Marquette or something like that, and they come up and they say, will you sign this petition? If I don't know what it's about, they can tell me all they want. I'm not going to sign it until I've had a chance, and that goes for judges in our elections, until I've had a chance to do my research. And somebody who doesn't, sorry.
I'll keep this really brief. So on that petition, one of the things that the petition sought was to have all rezoning decisions be a matter of public referendum. You could not zone or rezone any property in the city without having a general election. So beyond the fact that the format of their petition didn't satisfy the legal requirements, our city attorney determined really quickly that state law prohibits zoning decisions being made by public referendum. You don't have citywide election if you want to rezone from commercial 1 to commercial 2. All right. So that was one thing. When I saw the
That's
petition,
California.
I looked and I saw all of my neighbors having signed it. And at that point in time in my neighborhood, my neighbors knew that I had been mayor for 10 years. And I thought, they're signing this thing, and they never had, thought that they could just come across the yard and ask me about it, or talk about it, or find out why we were doing this, that, or the other. I called one of my next door neighbors and I said, Randy, I saw you sign the petition. Can you tell me what, your concern or issue was, or what you thought, or what did they tell you? And he said, oh, they came to the door and they said, we want to lower taxes in the city, so we're circulating a petition. And he was honest. And I said, well, Randy, did you understand what was, well, I didn't really pay too much attention, but they said they were going to try and lower taxes, so I signed it. And that's what we were up against.
There you go.
That's our history,
Yeah.
at least part of it, so. Thank you,
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you,
Tori.
Tori.
Yes. Any other comments regarding the ward provision at this time?
Actually, one question.
Sure.
Is the minimum like 3 wards?
No,
No.
I don't,
Well, I'm just wondering if, if you want to go head first into this, and we're a smaller community, but gonna be big, do you start small and instead of jump head first, can you change it easily if you,
Add wards.
see, you kind of chuckle when I say
Well-
easily, but you know what I mean, that you at least, you break the ice
Right.
and you start it instead of, you get 4 or 5,
Right.
and then you have to change
Well, I think,
all the council and everything.
Let me share 20 years' worth of experience. It's more difficult, the more council members you have, the more difficult it is for staff to administer the community. It's that simple, because
Sure.
it is that much harder to get consensus on items. So, I would discourage thinking that you would go beyond 5, to be completely honest, until you absolutely had to, because the more council members you have, the harder it is to get that consensus, especially if you don't have a strong mayor. Not strong as in the legal sense, but as strong as in able to get people to collaborate
Right,
and come to
right.
consensus.
I definitely think that's a good thing to start your conversations too. How can we kind of set this up so that if there is a need to change it down the line, it's not as difficult or cumbersome, or where could we foresee that change possibly occurring, and starting with 2 ward, say we did 2 wards, 2 at large.
Right.
And the mayor, well then, what if we do want to go to 4 wards throughout, where would that kind of naturally occur possibly? So I think that's definitely a good point of conversation for you all to have.
Okay.
Without expanding the
you
size of the
wouldn't
council.
necessarily have to go from 2 to 4, you could go 2 to 3, couldn't you? 3 wards
Yes,
with
you could.
one open, or,
One at large, yeah.
one at large and mayor.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
But as Tori mentioned, you want to, from a Voting Rights Act standpoint, you'd prefer to have a majority ward if you're doing it. So then you would have 3, 1 at large, and then your mayor.
right, right. George?
Yeah, mine is really under new business, so.
Okay.
If you're ready, I'll mention that.
Any other discussion on wards? No?
Just quick
Go ahead.
question.
Yep, Randy?
Assuming that the whole issue of wards is around representation, my wife and I have only been in Corcoran for 3.5 years. Are there issues among the citizens about being represented correctly?
Not at this time, I don't think.
Nobody's really heard anything?
No,
No, I
Nobody's
mean,
complained?
No,
it
I
can
don't-
happen, and I think Ken's point is a good one, that you're looking forward to the point in time when it can happen,
Okay,
and you're trying to head it off.
sure.
That's
Sure.
primarily the whole thought process, not saying you need to jump into a ward system tomorrow.
Right.
But you need to have thought through the process, you need to know when you're ready to pull the trigger, and do it before you get into a situation where you have a rogue council and you have all kinds of problems.
Well, the bookwork.
Well, and the other piece is that it's easier to run an at-large election with 5,000 residents than it is with 20,000. And
Yeah.
and that's where Corcoran's going, is gonna be in that 20,000 range, and probably more, depending on Met Council policies and everything else. So that's when you want to get into that ward system. That's why Ramsey transitioned from at-large to wards, to make it more manageable for campaigning. So then you're only having one or two elected officials going out and doing community-wide campaigning versus all 5.
And another point is that as much as we would like to think it would be otherwise, most of what the
Be an
city council
interesting
does,
question.
and,
Be an interesting
without an
question.
audience,
How many
or with very
wards?
little attention
when-
paid to it. So what happens is you get 5 individuals
To
up
begin
there
with.
exercising sort of their best judgment, common sense to arrive at solutions for the community, and you don't get a lot of input or feedback. And we all want to think that council members are constantly hearing from their constituents, or they're going out and surveying and polling people. It does happen, but not as much as you would hope. So I remember something like Edmund Burke said, you know, the people elect me for my judgment, not for my position on any individual issue. And that's really what we end up doing. And that's why I kind of emphasize this notion that electing people who bring a perspective to their discussion with the other council members is really important. Because it's not that I'm electing somebody to represent me as a hobby farm owner, but I would like to elect somebody who understands the issues that the farmers have in the community. And similarly, we need people on the council who represent the perspective of a more suburban residential setting. And we've got more and more of those people now. And they might have concerns or issues that those of us who have lived on acreage for 40 years just don't even think about anymore. So, to me, that's really important, because those elected representatives are going to have discussions where they're not getting input. They have to rely on the perspective they bring from their own setting. I think about it every time I see the plow go out. George can remember this. We used to get grief if we sent the plows out when there was less than 3 inches of snow.
Oh, yeah.
Seriously. And now every night, when I hear the plow going by at night, I wake up, because I would have gotten phone calls, why are you sending them out at night? And I still wake up when I hear that. And I think a lot of people in the community would think, what are you talking about? Of course we send them out at night, or of course we plow when there's 3 inches. George and I can write a list of names, and it'll be the same list, and we'll tell you who we got calls from.
That's right.
I've got one other quick
Sure,
question.
sure, Randy.
Are our elected officials in Corcoran concentrated in one part of the city? Or are they pretty spread out?
Well, let me see. Our mayor and Councilman Nichols live live in Ravinia. Does Schultz live in
He
Ravinia?
lives right on the neighborhood border.
Yeah.
And the neighborhood
Yeah.
next.
John Bottomell lives on acreage out off of Trail Haven, and
Dean lives on acreage.
Dean lives on acreage. Yeah.
I'm just thinking that could be an issue for, in
Right.
favor of having wards, is to spread out.
Well, I think that, I mean, we've been talking about this since about 2018 or 19.
Or
somewhere.
before that.
Yeah, maybe even before that. And it was largely due to the fact that we knew that Ravinia was coming in with a 450, then a 550 unit development. Then Bellwether was coming in up on the northeast area.
Yep.
M&I Homes had started a 156 unit development by the rodeo arena, but then they were doing a 350 unit development west of the Catholic Church. So we knew that the demographics of Corcoran were going to start to be changing.
Sure.
And so we just thought that this was a discussion we thought we should probably begin to have without feeling hurried into making a decision on
That makes
anything.
sense.
But even I'm still at a point where I'd like to see, well, what are some of these triggers that cause cities to go from not a ward system to a ward system? And so thank you.
Excuse me.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry, for
Sure.
doing that research.
You want
for
me to
us.
report back just directly to Jessica?
Yeah, that'd be fine. Yeah,
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll do that, thank you.
And so, you know, I think we're at the right stage to have discussions about this.
Sure.
I don't particularly think anybody on the commission nor the council have landed on this, we have to do this. But I do think the more information we gather, the more we can make a truly informed decision as to what's in the best interest of our city moving forward. And trying to be fair. I think that's the underpinnings of everything, is how to be fair to all of the voters in Corcoran and do our best to be that way. In spite of the fact that obviously there are cons and pros to everything. And a lot of the cons actually have to do with character more than the system itself, you know, and bad character can poison any kind of system too. So we've had those discussions for centuries, haven't we, you know? So, but I do think that, you know, I think our council is doing a really good job. There's nothing that I would say shadowy with what is going on behind the scenes with the council at all. I just think that this is a discussion that, as our city is transforming into a different type of city, we're still trying to hold on to what makes Corcoran an attractive place to live, while at the same time recognizing the demographics are changing, and how do we preserve and hold on to what we value out here in Corcoran. So that's really what's the underpinnings of it all.
Good.
Okay, can we move forward real quickly to some new business here?
Two things I'd like to have us consider. I'd like to get something started on the concept of a 4-year mayor term. I think that's something that we could do without even having to worry about the ward situation. We can move on that right away.
Yeah.
Maybe we just need to do a little bit of background on it, but I would say let's get that on our next meeting.
I agree. I agree.
The other, and I'm still wanting to take a look at this whole issue of public information about candidates, candidate recruiting, candidate screenings, anything relating to the quality of the people who are running for office and informing the public.
Could we have something like that on our city website? Is that a possibility?
Well, I think what we need to do is kind of come up with what might be a good model, and then present it to the city staff for some feedback on what's
Sure.
practical.
Sure.
There may be some issues in terms of any limitations that we might have to do in Minnesota here. I'm not sure if there's any statutory limitations on how much can be shared. I don't think there is, but, because there's not a lot of communities doing it right now, it sort of raises the question is, why haven't they?
Well, there's liability issues.
Yeah,
If you're going out and publishing things in a newsletter that you just verbatim take from the candidate, and there's things that are
False.
false in there, then you put the city into liability for.
Well, I think of it in terms of, I've served on corporate board, and, when you get on, when you're looking for people to serve on the board, you're recruiting. You're going out and you're finding somebody that's a good candidate, and then you put them through a background check, you do all that sort of thing before you even put them up for election.
Yep.
We don't do that.
Well, the Constitution precludes us from doing that.
Yes, so, maybe we can't.
One other item for our next business, or maybe for our annual business meeting, fall meeting.
Yep.
I would like to discuss, there are some mechanical ways that we can stagger our commission terms. And because we have such a large appointment in 1 year, it's gonna be just a practical problem. We're gonna have this lump occurring every 4th year. And I thought through some ways that actually we can achieve staggered terms without having anybody to go off the commission or add more people to the commission. Mechanically, it can be accomplished, but we should discuss that a little bit.
Yeah, to your point, Ken, Jim goes off in 2024, so we
How
didn't.
much of a head start do I need, seeing that you're in the,
Well, yeah, it's interesting, the judge gets the applications, and I think they're not the most important thing on his desk, because they kind of sit.
yeah?
So it's not that Ken didn't get his application in on time, it's the judge didn't get the appointment.
He didn't
made.
get the memo.
Yes, but
Did he
Jim,
call you?
Jim, you
No, I
roll,
haven't heard from him. I think he sent it in January. I think.
Yeah, and it generally gets reviewed by a recommendation by the council, and then it got sent off by the city clerk. Sounds like there might have been a little bit of a delay on our end, but it is with them, and we haven't heard anything yet.
so Jim rolls off next year, 2024, then we have 6 people
Right.
that roll off in 2025, which are all of you guys. And then George and I roll off in 2026. So we go 1, 6, and 2. And Ken would probably be 2027, I would imagine, if you get appointed now. So I think it would be good to do something on the staggering So we don't have that 6 people rolling off one year and one
Right.
person rolling off in the other year, so that'd be good. Yes.
I was just gonna note, our next meeting is September 13th, is what we had scheduled
Yeah.
at the end of.
So one thing I'd like to throw out is how we can convert these discussions into, yes, we move forward with a proposal, or we kind of just continually discuss it every year and are satisfied with that. So thinking in terms of, how do you structure going forward? We've had an offer to do some more homework and bring that back and explain what were the trigger events in other cities. Consensus building, educating is a huge part of it. So at what point do you have a session involving the council members? Because this is probably something that's big enough you would want it to go on the ballot versus having the council adopt it. Both are ways you can amend. I guess my inclination would be that it's an appropriate one for a ballot amendment, but if the council's on board and they want to do it, they can. But you have to have the council on board side by side with you as you develop
Right.
your knowledge base to, address the issues and concerns. You can't create a fully baked plan and then throw it on the council table and expect them to pick it up. Same goes for the general public. So when we were creating the first versions of the comprehensive plan, we had public open houses like you wouldn't believe. And we, you create the public house, open house, you advertise it, you have all of the people there to work the room, and you hope people show up. If you don't show up, you've done everything you can, but you have to be able to say that we gave the public an opportunity to come in and face-to-face question the people who were involved in making the decision or will be making the decision. We kind of owe it to them to do that. So that's another thing, if we anticipate moving forward on this, how do you develop, when do you actually create an outline that's specific enough that people can start to say, I like it or I don't like it, I can throw darts at it, here's where I would tweak it, it kind of hits the mark, but maybe we need to do this, push it, pull it, whatever. Until you have that blueprint, you're still just having very broad academic discussions, and it's really hard to arrive at
Right.
the final product. So I guess what I'm getting at is more work sessions, how often, what's fair to staff in terms of support?
Should-
What do the commissioners do themselves in terms of commissioners doing homework and generating language on a document, that kind of stuff?
Did you have a comment?
I was just gonna note that I had, a few of the topics that we talked about as the 4-year mayoral, term is some information that staff could probably, bring back. Voter information, what that could look like, is something staff could bring back. Just the regular terms and appointments. Staggered terms, it sounds like, Ken, you had some ideas, so that would likely be something you bring back. Commissioner Tucker wanted to bring back some information on wards, and then what I'm hearing is maybe a potential, if we should talk about a joint session at the September 13th meeting, having that as a topic of discussion. So I think those would be the items for that. I do know that we do have one member that needs to leave, and so we probably do need to wrap up to maintain our quorum in the next couple of minutes.
Let me just ask this. Would it be prudent for us to have a meeting before our 12th meeting, our September 13th meeting, rather? Would it be prudent to have a meeting that, let's ask Commissioner Tucker to get some of this information, let's say, in the next 3 months, have a meeting in 3 months, maybe, maybe June, and then we could have more consensus as to what Corcoran would look like if we were to pull the trigger on this compared to some other cities. And then we could have something more of a target for our the 13th.
And Jessica, would it be possible that as we set up, if we set up another meeting, to survey the commission members and the staff to find the best time of day or day of week to meet, so that people have the time, we're not constrained. You know, part of the challenge with our annual meetings, we meet before the council meeting, and whether we like it or not, we have to be done.
We have moved it to
Oh,
a
that's
Tuesday.
right. Okay. But
We're working on changing.
one of the discussions we always had on the council when we tried to schedule a workshop, was it better or worse to schedule it for Saturday morning? You know, and you get both sides of that, but the point was, can we schedule a time period when we're not gonna face constraints on the back end? We gotta get out of the room, or people have to go, or whatever. But you can only arrive at that if you survey people, throw out and get their responses.
Yeah, I would like to not feel too constrained, especially on that meeting when we get information from Commissioner Tucker. And then we could formulate kind of a game plan to present to the council on the 13th of September, you know. Okay?
Jeff can send out an email
Okay.
to ask commissioners.
You can do a doodle poll.
Yeah.
A doodle poll might work, there'd just be a lot of dates in June. Maybe I'll narrow it down to a couple weeks in June.
Yeah, because you have, to
Yeah.
take, you know, your schedule into consideration and, so, and,
Yeah, I'm planning to go to the league conference in June, so.
Yeah, I
I
have
don't
got
know if you were planning on going either, but.
any other
Have a vacation.
comments? Any other ideas? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So move.
Second.
Moved by Dan and seconded by Commissioner Hawkinson. All in favor? Say aye.
Right.
Aye.